Hey guys, tonight we begin with something particularly unforgiving. A time when death in glorious battle wasn't just a saying, but an actual career requirement. When personal hygiene was optional, but axe wielding was mandatory. And when your life expectancy could be measured in raids rather than years. We're diving into what daily life was really like as a Viking warrior in medieval Scandinavia. Not the Hollywood version with heroic speeches and romantic adventure, but the brutal reality of existence in one of history's most violent cultures. Forget the romanticized notion of noble Norse warriors sailing off into magnificent sunsets to discover new lands while looking like ancient supermodels with perfect braids and gleaming armor. Forget the inspiring sagas about honor and glory that make Viking life seem like an extended adventure vacation with occasional combat. The truth about Viking existence is far more disturbing. You probably wouldn't survive your first winter as a Viking child, let alone make it to adulthood in a society where violence was the primary solution to most problems and death was considered the most honorable career outcome. The reality of Viking life was relentless cold, systematic brutality, and a social system built around the assumption that your primary value as a human being was your ability to kill other people and die dramatically while doing it. This was a civilization that worshipped gods who demanded constant warfare, practiced slavery on an industrial scale, and considered peaceful death in old age a form of spiritual failure that condemned you to eternal dishonor. So, before you get comfortable in your heated home with your soft bed and your reasonable expectation of living past 30, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm not chasing empty metrics or meaningless engagement numbers. I want people who actually appreciate the careful research and detailed exploration that goes into examining history's most challenging periods without sensationalizing or romanticizing the harsh realities. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. Are you settling in for sleep in Stockholm while snow accumulates outside your window? Are you winding down after a long day in Denver, watching city lights twinkle against the mountains? Maybe you're lying in bed in Manchester, listening to rain against your windows and distant traffic sounds. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world, creating this little community of insomniacs and history enthusiasts who find comfort in exploring humanity's most brutal chapters. Now, dim the lights in your room. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft, consistent background hum that helps your mind settle into a state of relaxed attention. Adjust your pillows, pull up that comfortable blanket, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. We'll start with a life that would probably break your spirit within weeks. Then, we'll explore some remarkable individuals who somehow not only survived but shaped history despite facing seemingly impossible odds and circumstances that would terrify modern people. Get comfortable, because we're about to discover just how soft and sheltered modern civilization has made us all, and why you should be extraordinarily grateful for indoor plumbing, central heating, and legal systems that don't require trial by combat. Congratulations, you've just been born somewhere in medieval Scandinavia, probably in what will eventually become Norway, Sweden, or Denmark, sometime around 900 CE. But don't get too attached to the idea of existence, because your survival depends entirely on passing a series of tests that would horrify modern parents and violate every conceivable notion of child welfare and human rights. The first challenge is simply surviving the birth itself in a world where childbirth is essentially a lottery with death conducted in conditions that would appall modern medical professionals. Your mother has just endured labor without anesthesia, antibiotics, or any understanding of sterile procedures. In a wooden longhouse where the primary heat source is an open fire that fills the air with smoke, and the primary ventilation is whatever gaps exist between the wooden planks of the walls. If you survive the birth process, you face immediate evaluation by your father and the male elders of your family group. This isn't a celebration or welcoming ceremony. It's a practical assessment of whether you're worth the resources required to keep you alive through your first winter. Viking society operates on brutal economic calculations that view children as investments that must demonstrate potential return value. If you're born with any visible deformities, signs of weakness, or physical abnormalities that might indicate future inability to contribute to family survival, you may be subject to infant exposure, a euphemistic term for being left outside to die of cold and starvation. This isn't considered murder or infanticide in Viking culture. It's considered resource management. It's a necessary measure to ensure that limited food supplies and heating fuel go to children who might actually survive to adulthood and contribute to family prosperity. The decision is made quickly and without ceremony. There are no appeals, no second opinions, no consideration of potential or character. If the male head of household determines that you're unlikely to become a productive member of society, you'll be taken outside and left to die while your mother is still recovering from childbirth, often before any emotional bond can develop between parent and child. If you somehow pass this initial screening, congratulations, you've survived your first few hours as a Viking. But don't celebrate yet, because passing the evaluation doesn't guarantee survival. It merely qualifies you for a childhood that will test your physical endurance, pain tolerance, and ability to function in conditions that would challenge adult survivors. Your sleeping arrangements, assuming you're allowed to live, will be deliberately harsh from the earliest possible age. You'll sleep in a longhouse with your extended family, livestock, and whatever refugees or slaves your family has acquired through raiding or trade. The temperature inside is barely warmer than the temperature outside, and the air is thick with smoke from the central fire pit that provides the only heat source for the entire structure. There are no separate bedrooms, no privacy, no personal space, and definitely no comfort items designed to make childhood easier or more pleasant. You'll sleep on rough wooden platforms covered with animal furs that smell like the creatures they came from, often still containing parasites, fleas, and other forms of microscopic life that will make your skin their permanent home. Your mother, assuming she survived childbirth and is allowed to keep you, will not coddle you or provide the gentle nurturing that characterizes child-rearing in most civilizations. Viking mothers are expected to raise their children with the same harsh discipline that governs all aspects of Norse life. Comfort is considered dangerous weakness. Gentleness is viewed as counterproductive preparation for a life that will require extraordinary physical and mental toughness. Crying is not comforted, but ignored or actively discouraged as a sign of weakness that must be eliminated through conditioning. Viking babies learn quickly that emotional expression brings no relief, no attention, no comfort from adults who view tears as character flaws rather than natural expressions of infant needs. Feeding is regulated, controlled to ensure you develop the hunger tolerance that will serve you throughout your life as a raider and warrior. You will not be overfed, coddled with treats, or allowed to develop preferences for particular foods. Vikings believe that comfort with hunger is essential for warriors who must function effectively during long sea voyages, extended raids, and winter months when food supplies are uncertain and unreliable. Your early childhood will be structured around physical conditioning that begins before you can walk properly. You'll be exposed to extreme cold temperatures, physically demanding activities, and controlled deprivation designed to build the pain, tolerance, and environmental adaptability that Viking life requires for basic survival. By age 5 or 6, you'll be expected to contribute meaningfully to family survival through work that would be considered child labor in modern societies. You'll help with agricultural tasks, assist in food preparation, care for livestock, and participate in the constant maintenance work that prevents families from freezing or starving during the long Scandinavian winters. Your education will focus almost exclusively on practical skills needed for survival in a harsh environment in preparation for your eventual role as a warrior, raider, or support person for military activities. Academic learning is minimal and focuses on memorizing oral traditions, learning basic mathematical concepts needed for trade, and understanding social hierarchies that govern Viking society. There are no toys in the modern sense, no recreational activities designed purely for enjoyment, no creative expression that doesn't serve practical purposes. Play, when it occurs, involves mock combat, competitive physical challenges, and activities that build the skills you'll need as an adult member of a warrior culture. Your childhood will not include emotional development, individual attention to your unique needs and interests, or opportunities to explore personal preferences and talents. It will include daily exposure to violence, systematic conditioning to accept death as a normal part of life, and training designed to eliminate normal human responses to suffering and brutality. Welcome to Viking childhood, where survival to age 10 is considered an achievement in childhood innocence. It's viewed as a dangerous luxury that must be eliminated as quickly as possible to prepare you for a life that will probably end violently before you reach 30. So, you've somehow survived the brutal selection process and made it through early childhood without dying from exposure, starvation, disease, or the routine hardships of Viking family life. Congratulations, you now get to experience daily existence in a Viking longhouse, which is essentially communal living, designed by people who considered personal space a sign of dangerous individualism and privacy, a luxury that undermined family solidarity. The longhouse, where you'll spend most of your life, is a rectangular, wooden structure that's typically 60 to 100 feet wide, housing not just your immediate family, but your extended relatives, elderly family members, servants, slaves, livestock, and whatever temporary guests or refugees your family has taken in through obligation, charity, or economic necessity. There are no separate rooms, no private sleeping quarters, no personal space, and absolutely no opportunity for solitude or individual reflection. Everyone sleeps, eats, works, argues, gets sick, gives birth, and dies in the same shared space, creating an environment that would challenge the sanity of modern people accustomed to privacy and personal autonomy. The walls are made of wooden planks that provide minimal insulation against a brutal Scandinavian climate. Gaps between the planks allow wind, snow, and cold air to penetrate the living space constantly, making indoor temperatures only marginally warmer than outdoor conditions. There are no windows in the modern sense, just small openings that can be covered with wooden shutters or animal skins when weather conditions require some protection from the elements. The roof is covered with sod, turf, or wooden shingles that leak constantly during rain and snow, creating puddles throughout the longhouse that freeze during winter months and contribute to the perpetually damp, cold atmosphere that characterizes Viking domestic life. The central fire pit provides the only heat source for the entire structure, but maintaining adequate warmth requires constant attention and enormous quantities of firewood that must be gathered, chopped, and stored during summer months for winter survival. The fire produces as much smoke as heat, filling the longhouse with acrid fumes that make breathing difficult and eyes water constantly. Smoke escapes through holes in the roof to also allow rain, snow, and cold air to enter the living space. The interior air quality is so poor that respiratory problems are common. And the constant smoke inhalation causes long-term lung damage that contributes to shortened life expectancy. Your sleeping area is a wooden platform or bench covered with animal furs and whatever textile materials your family can afford or acquire through trade. These sleeping surfaces are shared with other family members, and there's no concept of personal bedding or individual sleeping spaces. You'll sleep pressed against other people, sharing body heat, diseases, and parasites in an arrangement that prioritizes survival over comfort or hygiene. The furs used for bedding still contain the hair, skin oils, and scent of the animals they came from, along with fleas, lice, and other parasites that transfer freely between the bedding and human occupants. Washing these materials is difficult and infrequent, so they accumulate months or years of human sweat, body oils, and various biological fluids that create a perpetual odor that would overwhelm modern sensibilities. Privacy for personal hygiene, intimate conversations, or individual activities simply doesn't exist. Bathing, when it occurs at all, happens in front of other family members using heated water in wooden tubs or basins. Personal grooming, changing clothes, and bodily functions that modern people consider private are performed in view of everyone else in the longhouse. Sexual activity between married couples occurs in the same shared space where children sleep. Elderly relatives rest, and other family members conduct their daily activities. There's no privacy for intimate relationships, no opportunity for romantic moments that don't involve an audience of family members and livestock. The livestock, pigs, chickens, goats, and sometimes cattle, live inside the longhouse during winter months, sharing the same air, water sources, and living space with human occupants. These animals contribute their own waste, odors, diseases, and parasites to an environment that's already challenging from a hygiene and health perspective. Food preparation occurs in the same central area where people sleep, work, and conduct all other daily activities. Cooking is done over the central fire using iron pots and wooden utensils, with ingredients that include whatever meat, vegetables, and grains your family has managed to preserve from the previous harvest or acquire through trade and raiding. Waste disposal is primitive and inadequate. Human waste is deposited in pits outside the longhouse or simply scattered in areas downwind from the living quarters. These waste sites attract insects, rodents, and scavengers that spread disease and create additional health hazards for the entire family group. Water sources are often contaminated with runoff from waste sites, animal droppings, and decomposing organic matter. Wells, when they exist, are shallow and easily contaminated by surface water that carries bacteria, parasites, and other disease-causing organisms. The social dynamics of longhouse life create constant tension and conflict between family members who have no opportunity to escape each other's company. Personality conflicts, disputes over resources, and interpersonal problems that modern families might resolve through separation or privacy must be managed within the constraints of shared living space and economic interdependence. Children grow up with no concept of personal property, individual space, or privacy. Everything belongs to the family group, and individual preferences or needs are subordinated to collective survival and family harmony. This communal approach to life eliminates many forms of personal development and individual expression that modern people consider essential for psychological health. Mental health problems might be addressed through solitude, personal space, or individual therapy in modern contexts must be managed within the constraints of communal living where emotional difficulties affect everyone and privacy for processing personal problems doesn't exist. Your entire existence, from birth to death, will be lived in the constant company of other people who share your space, resources, conflicts, and daily struggles. Personal autonomy, individual privacy, and the opportunity for solitary reflection that modern people take for granted will never be available to you as a member of Viking society. So you've somehow survived childhood in the longhouse and reached the age where Viking society expects you to begin your career as a professional warrior and raider. You might think this represents advancement from the harsh conditions of your youth. It's an opportunity to prove your worth and gain status within your community. You would be wrong. Your life as a Viking warrior will be more dangerous, more uncomfortable, and more psychologically damaging than anything you experienced during your brutal childhood conditioning. your day begins before dawn. Not because you have personal goals or ambitions to pursue, but because Viking warfare requires constant preparation, physical conditioning, and weapon maintenance that determines whether you live or die during your next raiding, expedition, or defensive action. You'll wake up on a hard sleeping surface in conditions that would challenge modern special forces soldiers, wearing the same clothes you've worn for weeks or months, surrounded by other warriors whose personal hygiene standards would horrify contemporary people and whose emotional stability has been compromised by years of systematic violence and trauma. Your morning routine begins with weapon maintenance. That's literally a matter of life and death. Your sword, axe, spear, and shield must be kept in perfect condition because equipment failure during combat means certain death and potential disaster for your entire raiding party or defensive unit. The weapons themselves are crude by modern standards, but extraordinarily dangerous to everyone who handles them. Viking swords are heavy, unwieldy, and designed for hacking rather than precision cutting. They require constant sharpening, oiling, and repair to prevent rust, damage, and breakage that could leave you defenseless during critical moments. Your shield is made of wood, covered with leather, and reinforced with iron. Approximately 15 pounds and measuring roughly 3 feet in diameter. This shield must be replaced frequently because Viking combat destroys equipment rapidly. And shield failure during battle means immediate death from opponents who show no mercy to disabled enemies. Your body armor, if you're wealthy enough to afford any, consists of chainmail that weighs approximately 40 pounds and provides limited protection against the weapons commonly used in Viking warfare. Most warriors can't afford armor and fight, wearing only their regular clothes, making every combat encounter a high probability death sentence. Physical conditioning for Viking warriors involves exercises and activities that would challenge modern athletes, but must be performed while malnourished, inadequately rested, and suffering from injuries and illnesses that receive minimal medical attention. You'll practice combat techniques with real weapons that cause serious injuries during training exercises. Viking military education doesn't use wooden practice weapons or safety equipment. You learn to fight by fighting with sharp metal implements that can kill or maim you even during educational activities. The psychological conditioning required for effective Viking warfare goes far beyond what modern soldiers experience during military training. You must learn to function effectively in combat situations that involve extraordinary levels of personal violence, brutality, and chaos that would traumatize ordinary people. Viking combat is not the organized, strategic warfare depicted in movies. It's personal, brutal, and terrifying close quarters fighting where you can see the faces of people you're trying to kill, hear their voices as they die, and fight in conditions where blood, intestines, and brain matter cover your equipment and body. You'll participate in raids that involve attacking defenseless farming communities, monasteries, and trading settlements where your primary targets are unarmed civilians who have no military training or equipment to defend themselves. These raids aren't glorious military campaigns against equally matched opponents. They're systematic robbery, rape, and murder of ordinary people whose only crime was living in locations that Viking raiders can reach by ship and overcome through superior numbers and military training. The psychological toll of repeatedly attacking defenseless civilians is enormous, but Viking culture provides no support for warriors suffering from what modern people would recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder. Mental health problems are viewed as character weaknesses that must be hidden or overcome through individual effort. Your diet during military campaigns consists of whatever food you can carry in your ship or steal from the communities you attack. This usually means salted meat, dried fish, and grain products that provide minimal nutrition and become monotonous and unpalatable. After weeks or months of consumption, fresh water is often unavailable during sea voyages, forcing you to drink beer or ale that's been stored in wooden barrels, where it develops unpleasant flavors and potentially dangerous bacterial contamination. Dehydration and malnutrition are constant problems that affect your physical performance and mental clarity during critical situations. Your sleeping arrangements during military campaigns involve sleeping outdoors in weather conditions that range from uncomfortable to life-threatening. Using minimal shelter and bedding that provides inadequate protection from cold, rain, and wind. You'll often sleep fully armed and ready for combat, because surprise attacks are common tactics in Viking warfare. This means spending weeks or months without ever feeling truly safe or relaxed, creating chronic stress and exhaustion that compromise your health and decision-making abilities. Injuries are common and receive minimal medical treatment. Vikings have no understanding of infection control, surgical procedures, or pain management. Serious wounds are often fatal, not because they're inherently deadly, but because they become infected and cause sepsis that kills slowly and painfully. Minor injuries that would be easily treated in modern contexts can become career-ending disabilities or life-threatening complications when proper medical care isn't available. Many warriors die from wounds that modern emergency medicine could treat successfully with basic antibiotics and surgical techniques. The economic reality of Viking warfare is that most raids are financial failures that cost more in equipment, supplies, and human casualties than they generate in plunder and captured goods. Warriors often return from months-long expeditions poorer than when they left, having risked their lives for minimal economic benefit. Success in Viking warfare depends largely on luck rather than skill or preparation. Weather conditions, navigation errors, intelligence failures, and random encounters with superior enemy forces can turn profitable raids into disasters that kill entire crews and destroy years of preparation and investment. Your career as a Viking warrior will probably end with violent death before you reach 30, leaving behind no pension, no retirement benefits, and no guarantee that your family will be cared for after your death. The glorious afterlife promised to warriors who die in battle is poor compensation for a life that's brutal, short, and typically unsuccessful. After months of brutal training and psychological conditioning, you finally get to experience the activity that defines Viking culture and provides the economic foundation for Scandinavian society, raiding defenseless communities for profit. You might expect that all the hardship and preparation you've endured would at least lead to adventures that justify the sacrifices demanded by warrior life. You would be severely disappointed. Viking raiding is less glorious adventure and more systematic robbery conducted under conditions that test your survival skills, moral flexibility, and ability to function effectively while hungry, cold, and terrified. Your first challenge is simply surviving the sea voyage to reach target's worth. Attacking. Viking ships are essentially large wooden boats that offer minimal protection from weather, waves, and the constant possibility of capsizing in storms that appear without warning in North Atlantic waters. The ships are approximately 70 feet long and 15 feet wide, designed to carry 30 to 60 warriors plus supplies for extended voyages. This means you're packed into cramped conditions with other men whose personal hygiene would horrify modern people, sharing limited space for weeks or months, while consuming monotonous food and drinking water that becomes increasingly unpalatable. As the voyage progresses, there are no cabins, no private sleeping areas, no protection from rain, wind, or freezing temperatures. You sleep on the open deck or under minimal shelter that provides inadequate protection from weather conditions that range from uncomfortable to potentially fatal. Navigation is primitive and unreliable, based on observations of stars, sun position, and coastal landmarks that can be obscured by weather for days or weeks. Getting lost at sea is a common occurrence that often results in death by starvation, dehydration, or exposure when ships can't find their intended destinations or return routes. Your food supplies consist of salted meat, dried fish, and grain. Products that spoil quickly and become infested with insects, mold, and bacteria during long voyages. Fresh water is stored in wooden barrels where it develops unpleasant tastes and potentially dangerous contamination that can cause illness or death. When you finally reach a target community, the actual raiding process is often anticlimactic and morally disturbing in ways that Viking culture doesn't prepare you for. Your targets are usually farming villages, monasteries, or small trading settlements inhabited by ordinary people who have no military training or equipment to defend themselves. These aren't battles against equally matched opponents or heroic confrontations with enemy warriors. They're attacks on defenseless civilians, farmers, monks, women, children, and elderly people whose only crime was living in locations accessible to Jizisaba, to lacking ships and lacking adequate fortifications or military protection. The violence required for successful raiding is brutal and personal. You'll be expected to kill people who pose no threat to you, steal property that represents their life savings and survival resources, and destroy communities that took years to build and develop. The psychological impact of attacking defenseless people is severe, but Viking culture provides no framework for processing guilt, moral conflict, or emotional trauma that might result from systematic violence against innocent victims. Women and children are often taken as slaves during raids, creating logistical and moral complications that Viking warriors are expected to manage without emotional reaction. The slave trade is economically important for Viking society, but it requires participating in human trafficking and forced labor systems that would horrify modern people. The economic reality of raiding is that most expeditions are financial failures. The costs of ships, equipment, supplies, crew compensation often exceed the value of goods stolen during raids, especially after accounting for casualties, equipment losses, and expenses incurred during long voyages. Weather conditions, navigation errors, and intelligence failures frequently result in raids that find no suitable targets, encounter stronger resistance than expected, or arrive at locations that have already been raided recently and contain little wealth worth stealing. Many raiding expeditions end in disaster when ships are damaged by storms, crews are killed by disease or enemy action, or navigation errors leave raiders stranded in unfamiliar territory without adequate supplies for return voyages. The plunder obtained during successful raids often consists of goods that are difficult to transport, have limited value in Scandinavian markets, or deteriorate quickly during sea voyages. Stolen livestock dies during transport, grain spoils in ship storage, and manufactured goods are damaged by salt water and rough handling. Competition between Viking raiding groups creates additional dangers and complications. Rival crews often attack each other for territory, targets, and plunder, making other Vikings as dangerous as foreign enemies or natural hazards. The legal and social consequences of raiding create long-term problems for Viking communities. Successful raids often provoke retaliation from victims or their allies, leading to cycles of violence that continue for generations and create permanent enemies who threaten Scandinavian territories and trading relationships. International hostility generated by Viking raiding activities isolates Scandinavian communities from peaceful trade relationships and diplomatic opportunities. It might provide more reliable economic benefits than military expansion and systematic robbery. Your personal safety during raids is constantly threatened, not just by enemy resistance, but by your own companions, who may see you as competition for plunder, leadership positions, or survival resources. Trust between crew members is limited and fragile, creating internal conflicts that can be as deadly as external threats. The physical conditions during raiding activities are harsh and dangerous. You'll often fight while hungry, thirsty, exhausted, and suffering from injuries or illnesses that receive minimal medical attention. Equipment failures. weapon damage. Can inadequate supplies create additional challenges that can turn successful raids into survival situations? Even successful raids that generate substantial plunder provide limited long-term economic benefits for individual warriors. Most wealth is distributed according to social hierarchies that favor ship owners, expedition leaders, and established warriors, leaving common raiders with minimal compensation for enormous risks and hardships. Your career as a Viking raider will probably consist of numerous unsuccessful expeditions, punctuated by occasional profitable raids that barely compensate for the accumulated costs. Injuries and trauma of repeated violence. The romantic image of Viking adventure masks, an economic and social system built on systematic brutality that benefits few participants and destroys many communities. Now that you understand the brutal reality of Viking warfare and raiding, let's examine the religious beliefs that not only justify this violence, but actively demand it as a spiritual obligation. Norse religion isn't a peaceful faith focused on love, compassion, personal salvation. It's essentially a death cult that glorifies warfare, celebrates violence, and teaches that your primary purpose in life is to die dramatically while killing other people. The central figures in Norse mythology are the Geir, a pantheon of gods led by Odin, who is simultaneously the god of war, death, wisdom, and poetry. But don't let the poetry part fool you into thinking he's a gentle, artistic figure. Kaden is a war god who demands constant human sacrifice, delights in battlefield carnage. Keda, and specifically recruits dead warriors to fight in an apocalyptic battle that will destroy the entire universe, according to Norse religious beliefs. The ultimate goal of existence is Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, a cosmic war that will result in the death of most deities, the destruction of the known world, and the end of everything that currently exists. This isn't a distant theoretical possibility or a symbolic metaphor. It's the inevitable conclusion of cosmic history. And your role as a Viking warrior is to prepare for this universal destruction by practicing warfare and violence throughout your entire life. Odin's primary activity involves collecting dead warriors from battlefields to form an army called the Einherjar, who will fight alongside the gods during Ragnarok. These warriors spend their afterlife in Valhalla, not resting peacefully or enjoying eternal bliss, but training for combat and fighting practice, fuse every day in preparation for the cosmic war that will end everything. This means that Norse religion specifically encourages death in combat as the most desirable possible outcome of human existence. Dying peacefully of old age or natural causes is considered a spiritual failure that condemns you to an inferior afterlife in hell, realm of the goddess of death, where you'll spend eternity among cowards, weaklings, and people who failed to die violently enough to attract Odin's attention. The religious practices associated with Norse faith involve regular human sacrifice designed to maintain the favor of gods who demand blood offerings and violence as expressions of devotion. These sacrifices aren't symbolic or ceremonial. They involve actually killing people, often in elaborate rituals that maximize suffering and demonstrate devotion through systematic brutality. The most famous of these sacrificial practices is the blood eagle, a ritual execution method that involves cutting open the victim's back, breaking their ribs, and pulling out their lungs while they're still alive. This horrific procedure is performed as an offering to Odin, demonstrating religious devotion through the infliction of maximum pain and terror on human victims. Seasonal religious festivals involve mass sacrifices of animals and humans, with the blood used to consecrate temples, weapons, and religious artifacts. These ceremonies create community bonding through shared participation in violence and establish social hierarchies based on willingness to participate in systematic killing. The Norse concept of honor is directly tied to violence and death. Honorable behavior involves seeking out dangerous situations, challenging superior opponents, and choosing death over retreat or compromise. This religious framework makes peaceful conflict resolution spiritually unacceptable and morally cowardly. Vows and oaths in Norse society are sacred commitments that often involve promises to perform specific acts of violence, seek revenge for past wrongs, or die in particular ways that demonstrate devotion to violent gods. Breaking these oaths is considered worse than murder and results in spiritual contamination that affects entire family groups. The religious calendar is structured around festivals that celebrate warfare, commemorate past battles, and prepare participants for future violence. These events involve ritual consumption of alcohol, competitive displays of weapon skills, and storytelling that glorifies past acts of brutality and murder. Religious art and literature focus obsessively on themes of violence, death, and destruction. The greatest heroes in Norse mythology are warriors who die dramatically after killing large numbers of enemies. And the most admired qualities are courage in combat, skill with weapons, eyes, and willingness to die for violent causes. The priesthood, such as it exists, consists primarily of warriors who perform religious duties as extensions of their military roles. There are no professional clergy dedicated to peace, healing, or spiritual comfort. Religious authority comes from demonstrated skill in warfare and proven willingness to participate in human sacrifice. Women in Norse religion serve primarily as vehicles for producing future warriors or as participants in religious rituals that support male violence. The Valkyries, female supernatural beings who serve Odin, are essentially divine recruitment officers whose job is to identify and collect dead warriors for the cosmic army. The religious education provided to children focuses on preparing them for violent death as the highest spiritual achievement. Stories, songs, and moral instruction all emphasize that peaceful, cued, productive life is spiritually worthless compared to dramatic death in combat. This religious framework creates a society where violence is not just accepted, but required for spiritual salvation. Norse religion doesn't provide comfort for suffering, hope for peace, or encouragement for peaceful resolution of conflicts. It demands constant warfare as a religious obligation and teaches that the ultimate purpose of existence is to participate in universal destruction. The psychological impact of these beliefs on Viking society is enormous. People live their entire lives preparing for violent death, viewing peace as spiritual failure, seeking out dangerous situations that will provide opportunities for combat and killing. Mental health, compassion, and emotional stability are viewed as weaknesses that interfere with religious obligations to participate in violence. The Norse religious system actively discourages psychological healing, conflict resolution, and social cooperation that might reduce opportunities for warfare and bloodshed. Your entire existence as a Viking is structured around religious beliefs that demand violence, celebrate death, and teach that universal destruction is the ultimate goal of cosmic history. Personal happiness, peaceful relationships, and individual survival are not just discouraged. They're considered forms of spiritual rebellion against gods, require constant warfare and systematic brutality from their followers. If you thought being a male Viking warrior was challenging, try being a Viking woman. It's like playing life on expert mode, but with the additional complexity of being expected to manage domestic life while your husband is away raiding, raise children who will probably die violently, and maintain psychological stability in a society that glorifies death and considers peace a form of spiritual failure. Viking women occupy a unique and often misunderstood position in Norse society. While they have more legal rights and social freedoms than women in many other medieval cultures, these advantages come with expectations and responsibilities that make their lives extraordinarily demanding in ways that most people never consider or fully appreciate. From birth, Viking girls are raised with the understanding that their primary function is to produce and raise the next generation of warriors while managing the complex domestic economy that keeps Viking society functioning during the long periods when men are away on raiding expeditions, trading voyages, or military campaigns. Your childhood as a Viking girl involves physical conditioning that's almost as intense as what boys experience, but focused on different skills. You'll learn to manage livestock, preserve food, operate primitive textile production systems, and maintain households that must function independently for months or years when male family members are absent or dead. This isn't recreational, skill building, or optional education. Your ability to perform these tasks effectively determines whether your family survives winter food shortages, maintains adequate clothing and shelter, preserves enough resources to support returning warriors who may arrive wounded, sick, or financially unsuccessful. You'll also receive training in combat skills, not because you're expected to become a professional warrior, but because Viking households must be defended during raids by rival groups, attacks by enemies seeking revenge, or invasions by foreign military forces that target Scandinavian communities. The weapons training you receive includes instruction in using knives, axes, and spears for both domestic tasks and personal defense. You'll learn to kill and butcher livestock, defend your home against human attackers, and participate in community defense activities when military threats require civilian involvement. Marriage in Viking society is primarily an economic and political arrangement designed to strengthen family alliances, consolidate resources, and produce children who will continue family lines and maintain property ownership. Your personal preferences regarding marriage partners are considered less important than strategic considerations that benefit family groups. The marriage ceremony itself emphasizes the transition from one family's property to another family's responsibility rather than celebrating personal choice or romantic attachment. You'll move from your birth family's longhouse to your husband's family's living arrangements, where you'll be expected to integrate into existing domestic hierarchies and social relationships. Your relationship with your husband will be complicated by his frequent absences during raiding seasons, trading expeditions, and military campaigns that can last for months or years. During these periods, you'll essentially function as a single parent while managing household production systems that require constant attention and sophisticated planning. When your husband is present, your relationship will be structured around his role as a warrior and raider whose primary identity and social status depend on activities that don't include you. His most important relationships are with other men who share his military experiences, and his emotional energy is focused on warfare rather than domestic life. Pregnancy and childbirth in Viking society involve enormous risks and minimal medical support. You'll give birth without anesthesia, sterile procedures, or understanding of complications that could kill you or your child. Maternal mortality rates are high, and surviving multiple pregnancies requires extraordinary luck and physical resilience. But surviving childbirth doesn't reduce your responsibilities, it increases them exponentially. Now you have children to raise in a society where childhood mortality rates are astronomical, and proper child rearing requires preparing your offspring for lives of violence, hardship, and probable early death. You'll be expected to raise your sons with the same harsh discipline that they'll experience as adult warriors, conditioning them for brutality rather than providing emotional nurturing and support. Showing too much affection or protectiveness toward male children is considered dangerous weakness that undermines their preparation for military life. Your daughters require different but equally demanding preparation for their roles as Viking women. You must teach them domestic skills, emotional control, and acceptance of their subordinate positions in a society structured around male violence and female support for military activities. Property ownership provides some economic independence that women in other cultures don't enjoy. But this freedom comes with responsibilities and restrictions that limit its practical benefits. You can own land, manage business affairs, and make economic decisions, but these activities must support your family's military objectives rather than serve personal interest. If your husband dies during raiding or warfare, which is statistically likely, you'll face the challenge of managing household production, raising children, and maintaining family property without male protection in a society where violence is common and legal protections are minimal. Widowhood in Viking society can provide increased independence and authority, but it also creates vulnerability too. Attacks from enemies seeking revenge, raids by rival families seeking property, social pressure to remarry for economic and defensive purposes rather than personal choice. Your social activities are limited by the demands of domestic production and childcare that require constant attention throughout the year. Viking women work longer hours and have fewer recreational opportunities than men, whose seasonal raiding activities provide variety and adventure that domestic life doesn't offer. Religious participation provides some social interaction and community involvement, but Norse religious practices focus heavily on supporting male violence rather than addressing women's spiritual needs or concerns. Your role in religious activities involves preparing for and supporting warfare rather than exploring personal faith or spiritual development. Even in old age, you'll be expected to maintain the harsh discipline and practical focus that characterized your entire life. There's no retirement from domestic responsibilities, no reduction in work demands, and no opportunity to develop personal interests or relationships that don't serve family survival needs. Your entire existence as a Viking woman will be structured around supporting a military system that values death over life, violence over peace, and male achievement over female contribution. Personal fulfillment, individual expression, and emotional satisfaction are luxuries that Viking society can't afford and won't tolerate. After a day of practicing violence, maintaining weapons, and preparing for your next raiding expedition, you might hope for basic comforts like a decent meal, adequate hygiene, and freedom from the diseases that constantly threaten Viking communities. You might imagine that a society capable of building sophisticated ships and conducting complex military operations would understand the importance of nutrition, cleanliness, and health maintenance. You would be disappointed on every level. Viking daily life involves food that would challenge a modern stomach, hygiene practices that would horrify contemporary health officials, and disease management that consists primarily of hoping you don't die while your body fights off infections without any medical assistance. Your typical meal consists of whatever food your family has managed to preserve from the previous harvest, acquire through trade, or steal during recent raids. This usually means salted or smoked meat that's been hanging in your longhouse for months. It's developing flavors and textures that would be considered spoiled by modern standards. The meat preservation process involves covering animal flesh with salt and hanging it in the smoke from your central fire pit for weeks or months. This prevents immediate decomposition, but creates food that's extremely salty. It's tough and permeated with the acrid taste of smoke from fires fueled by whatever organic matter your family can find to burn. Bread, when available, is made from barley, rye, or oat flour that's often contaminated with dirt, insects, and mold spores that create unpleasant flavors and potential health hazards. The grain is ground using primitive stone mills that add grit and rock particles to the flour, giving your bread a texture that wears down your teeth with every bite. During winter months, your diet consists primarily of preserved foods that have been stored since the previous harvest. Fresh vegetables don't exist. Fruits are memories from autumn, and dairy products are limited to whatever milk your livestock can produce while living in your longhouse and eating stored hay that may be moldy or spoiled. Vitamin deficiencies are common and cause health problems that Vikings don't understand or know how to treat. Scurvy from lack of fresh vegetables causes tooth loss, skin problems, and weakness that's attributed to supernatural causes rather than nutritional inadequacy. Fresh water is often contaminated with animal waste, human sewage, and decomposing. Organic matter that creates serious health hazards. Wells are shallow and easily contaminated by surface. Runoff from waste disposal areas and livestock pens that surround most Viking settlements. Beer and ale serve as safer alternatives to water, but these beverages are weak, often spoiled, and provide minimal nutritional value, while creating mild intoxication that affects judgment and physical coordination. Drinking alcohol daily, starting from childhood, is normal and necessary for survival, but it contributes to health problems and social dysfunction. Personal hygiene practices that modern people take for granted are completely absent from Viking daily life. Bathing is infrequent and difficult, requiring heated water that consumes valuable firewood and time that can be spent on survival activities. When bathing does occur, it involves shared water in wooden tubs that aren't cleaned between users, creating opportunities for disease transmission and cross-contamination that spread infections throughout family groups. The same water might be used by multiple people in succession, each one adding their own contribution to the bacterial soup. Soap, in the modern sense, doesn't exist. Vikings occasionally use harsh lye solutions made from wood, ash, and animal fat, but these substances are caustic and damaging to human skin. Most cleaning involves scrubbing with coarse cloth, sand, or rough stones that remove dirt while causing skin irritation and minor injuries. Dental hygiene consists of whatever teeth. Cleaning can be accomplished using twigs, rough cloth, or simply wiping your mouth with your hands. Toothbrushes, toothpaste, and dental floss don't exist, so your teeth accumulate layers of plaque, tartar, and bacterial growth that cause tooth decay, gum disease, and chronic bad breath. By adulthood, most Vikings have lost several teeth to decay and injury, making eating difficult and contributing to digestive problems and malnutrition. Tooth pain is constant and untreatable, creating chronic discomfort that affects mood, sleep, and physical performance. Clothing is rarely washed and accumulates months or years of sweat, dirt, food stains, and bodily fluids that create persistent odors and provide breeding grounds for parasites and bacteria. The same clothes are worn day and night in all weather conditions till they literally fall apart from wear and contamination. Parasites are universal companions that live on and inside every member of Viking society. Lice infest hair and clothing. Fleas jump between human and animal hosts. And intestinal worms are so common that they're considered normal parts of human anatomy rather than medical problems requiring treatment. Skin diseases is caused by poor hygiene, inadequate nutrition, and constant exposure to harsh weather conditions are common and persistent. Rashes, infections, and sores cover most people's bodies, creating discomfort and providing entry points for more serious bacterial infections. Respiratory illnesses are constant threats due to poor air quality in smoky longhouses, inadequate clothing for harsh weather, and living in close proximity to sick family members and livestock. Coughs, bronchitis, and pneumonia kill regularly, especially during winter months when vitamin deficiencies weaken. Immune systems. Disease treatment consists primarily of herbal remedies that may or may not have actual medicinal properties, combined with religious rituals designed to appease gods who are believed to control health and illness. There's no understanding of bacterial infections, viral diseases, or medical procedures that could actually improve health outcomes. Injuries from daily activities. Weapon practice and combat receive minimal medical attention and often become infected due to poor hygiene and lack of antiseptic procedures. Simple cuts and wounds that modern medicine could treat easily often become life-threatening complications that kill through sepsis and organ failure. Your life expectancy is shortened not just by violence and warfare, but by the accumulated health effects of poor nutrition, inadequate hygiene, and constant exposure to diseases that modern medicine prevents or treats successfully. Most Vikings die before age 40, worn down by a lifestyle that destroys health as efficiently as warfare destroys enemies. living conditions that would be considered. Animal abuse, if applied to livestock, are the normal human experience in Viking society. Your daily existence involves levels of discomfort, illness, and physical deterioration that modern people would find unendurable and completely unnecessary. Now that you understand the physical hardships of Viking life, let's examine the social system that determines whether you live as a relatively privileged warrior or die as an expendable slave. Viking society operates according to a rigid hierarchy. It's maintained through systematic violence and offers virtually no opportunity for social mobility or improvement of your circumstances through personal effort or merit. At the top of this system are the Jarls, wealthy landowners who control territory, command military forces, and live in relative luxury, while ordinary Vikings struggle for basic survival. These aristocrats didn't earn their positions through superior skills or moral character. They inherited wealth and power from previous generations or acquired it through successful violence against weaker populations. Jarls owned the ships used for raiding expeditions, controlled access to the best agricultural land, and command the loyalty of warriors who depend on them for equipment, supplies, and opportunities to participate in profitable raids. This economic control translates into absolute political authority over everyone else in Viking society. Below the Jarls are the Carls, free farmers and craftsmen who own small amounts of property and have legal rights that distinguish them from slaves. But don't let the word free fool you into thinking Carls have genuine independence or meaningful choices about their lives. Their freedom is limited and conditional, subject to the demands of aristocratic overlords who can destroy them economically or physically whenever convenient. As a Carl, you're expected to provide military service when demanded, contribute resources to community defense projects, and support the raids and wars that benefit Jarls while exposing you to death and injury for minimal compensation. Your freedom consists mainly of the right to risk your life for other people's profit. Your property ownership is precarious and can be lost through warfare, economic manipulation, or legal decisions made by people who have superior social status and political connections. There's no appeals process, no legal protection for ordinary people, and no recourse when powerful individuals decide to take what you own. Social mobility between these classes is virtually impossible under normal circumstances. Carls don't become Jarls through hard work, military success, or personal achievement. The aristocratic class protects its privileges through violence and economic manipulation that prevents commoners from accumulating enough wealth or power to challenge existing hierarchies. At the bottom of Viking society are the thralls, slaves, who have no legal rights, no personal property, and no hope of improving their circumstances. Many thralls are people captured during raids on foreign communities, but others are Vikings who lost their freedom through debt, criminal punishment, or family decisions that sold children into slavery to prevent starvation. Thralls perform the agricultural labor, domestic work, and dangerous tasks that keep Viking society functioning while receiving minimal food, shelter, and clothing in exchange for their lives. They're bought and sold like livestock, separated from families without consideration, and worked to death in conditions that would horrify modern people. The treatment of thralls reveals the true nature of Viking honor and courage. These supposedly heroic warriors maintained their lifestyle through systematic exploitation of enslaved people who would have no ability to defend themselves or escape their circumstances. Sexual abuse of female thralls is common and accepted as a normal privilege of ownership. Male thralls are worked until their bodies break down from physical exhaustion and maltreatment. Children born to thrall parents are automatically enslaved and have no opportunity to escape their inherited bondage. The legal system that governs these relationships is designed to protect the interests of Jarls and maintain social stability, rather than ensure justice or fair treatment for ordinary people. Laws are made by aristocrats, enforced by aristocrats, and interpreted in ways that benefit aristocratic interests. Criminal punishments are harsh and often involve physical mutilation, public humiliation, or death for offenses that modern legal systems would handle with fines or brief imprisonment. The severity of punishment depends more on your social status than the seriousness of your crime. Disputes between people of different social classes are automatically resolved in favor of the higher status individual, regardless of facts or evidence. A jarl's word carries more legal weight than testimony from multiple carls. And carl testimony is considered more reliable than anything a thrall might say. This legal framework makes it virtually impossible for lower status individuals to seek justice when they're victimized by social superiors. The system is designed to maintain existing power relationships rather than protect individual rights or ensure fair treatment. Economic opportunities are controlled by social status in ways that prevent upward mobility and ensure that aristocratic families maintain their advantages across generations. Carls can't engage in the most profitable forms of trade, don't have access to the best agricultural land, and are excluded from political decisions that affect their lives. Military leadership positions are reserved for jarls, regardless of their actual combat skills or strategic abilities. Ordinary warriors who demonstrate superior capabilities in battle don't receive promotions or recognition that would threaten aristocratic control over military organizations. This creates military inefficiency and tactical problems, but Viking society prioritizes social control over military effectiveness when the two objectives conflict. Maintaining class distinctions is more important than developing the best possible military leaders. Religious authority is also tied to social status, with aristocrats controlling access to important religious ceremonies and serving as intermediaries between ordinary people and the gods. Spiritual authority reinforces political power and provides additional tools for controlling populations who might otherwise challenge existing hierarchies. Women's social status depends entirely on their relationships with men rather than their individual qualities or achievements. A jarl's wife has more social power than a carl's husband, and a carl's daughter has higher status than a thrall's son, regardless of their personal capabilities or moral character. Your entire life as a Viking will be constrained by social boundaries that were established before your birth and can't be changed through personal effort, moral behavior, or exceptional achievement. The social hierarchy isn't based on merit, fairness, or practical considerations. It's maintained through systematic violence and economic control that benefits a small aristocratic class at the expense of everyone else. Understanding this social system reveals the true nature of Viking society, a brutal oligarchy disguised as a warrior culture, where supposed military virtues serve primarily to maintain economic exploitation and political oppression of the majority by a wealthy minority who inherited their privileges rather than earning them. After surviving childhood, enduring harsh living conditions, participating in brutal raids, and navigating the rigid social hierarchy that controls Viking society, you might think you've experienced everything that Norse culture has to offer. But there's one final lesson that awaits every Viking, and it reveals perhaps the most disturbing aspect of their entire social system: how you're expected to die and why peaceful death is considered a form of spiritual failure. Death in Viking society isn't a personal tragedy or a natural conclusion to individual existence. It's a performance opportunity, final chance to demonstrate your worth as a Viking and provide educational entertainment for surviving members of your community. The manner of your death determines your social legacy, spiritual destination, and family's reputation for generations. The only acceptable death for a Viking warrior is violent death in combat while fighting enemies of your family, community, or clan. Dying of disease, old age, or accident is considered evidence of moral weakness, spiritual failure, or divine displeasure that brings shame to your relatives and reduces your family's social status. Warriors who die dramatically in battle are honored with elaborate funeral ceremonies that celebrate their violence and provide inspiration for younger Vikings preparing for their own military careers. Their names are remembered in stories and songs that glorify their killing achievements and encourage others to seek similar glorious deaths. But warriors who survive multiple campaigns and live to old age face social pressure and religious condemnation for failing to die appropriately. Elderly Vikings who can no longer participate in raiding or warfare become economic burdens who consume resources without contributing military value to their communities. The Norse religious system actively encourages aging warriors to seek out dangerous situations that will provide opportunities for honorable death in combat. Suicide missions are disguised as military operations, but their real purpose is eliminating social burdens while maintaining the fiction that all Vikings die gloriously in service to their gods. The process of dying appropriately requires the same emotional control and physical discipline that characterizes all aspects of Viking life. You're expected to face death without fear, pain, or regret, demonstrating that your conditioning has been successful and your dedication to violent values is complete. Warriors who show fear, request medical assistance, or express any desire to survive rather than die for military objectives are considered failures who bring dishonor to their families and disappointment to their gods. Survival instincts and normal human responses to danger are viewed as character flaws rather than natural biological functions. The famous Viking mothers who preferred to receive news that their sons had died in battle rather than survive through retreat or tactical withdrawal weren't expressing metaphorical toughness. They were literally stating that death was preferable to life with dishonor, and that they would disown any son who valued personal survival over military objectives. This attitude toward death extends beyond military service to all aspects of Viking life. Citizens who become sick, disabled, or unable to contribute to community survival expected to eliminate themselves rather than burden others with their care and medical expenses. Suicide, when performed for socially approved purposes, is considered honorable and admirable rather than tragic or mentally unhealthy. Vikings who kill themselves to avoid becoming burdens escape situations that might compromise their honor or prevent capture by enemies are celebrated, as examples of proper dedication to cultural values. The systematic devaluation of individual life that characterizes Viking culture makes death seem like a reasonable solution to problems that other societies might address through medical care, social support, or personal adaptation to changing circumstances. Children learn from early age that their lives have value only insofar as they serve Viking military objectives and cultural expectations. Personal happiness, individual fulfillment, and survival for its own sake are considered selfish luxuries that compromise dedication to collective goals and religious obligations. This conditioning makes Viking warriors extraordinarily willing to accept death in combat situations where self-preservation instincts might interfere with military objectives. But it also makes them incapable of valuing their own lives or finding meaning in existence. Beyond warfare and violence, funeral practices reflect these cultural attitudes toward death and dying. Viking funerals are designed to encourage living community members to seek similar violent deaths rather than provide comfort for grieving families or celebration of the deceased's life achievements. Burial goods include weapons, armor, and other military equipment that emphasize the warrior identity of the deceased, while minimizing any nonviolent aspects of their personality or relationships. The message is clear. Your value as a person depends entirely on your willingness and ability to kill other people. Funeral speeches focus on the deceased combat achievements, number of enemies killed, and dramatic circumstances of their death, rather than their relationships, personal qualities, or contributions to community life outside of warfare. The result is a society where death is more valued than life, where ending existence is considered more honorable than continuing to live, and where the ultimate goal of human development is learning to die appropriately for causes determined by religious and political authorities. The legendary Viking courage that modern people admire wasn't heroic transcendence of natural fear or noble dedication to worthy causes. It was psychological damage that prevented normal human responses to danger and made death seem preferable to the social humiliation that came with survival and peaceful existence. Modern societies that romanticize Viking culture often ignored this fundamental aspect of their achievement. The discipline, unity, and military effectiveness that made Viking warriors legendary was built on systematic dehumanization that made life itself less valuable than abstract cultural objectives and religious obligations. Understanding Viking attitudes toward death reveals the true cost of their military culture, the creation of human beings who were perfectly designed for dying violently and completely incapable of living meaningful, peaceful lives that didn't involve constant preparation for warfare and systematic brutality. Your life as a Viking will probably end before you reach 30. Spare circumstances that benefit other people more than yourself, for objectives that you didn't choose and may not understand. The glorious afterlife promised to warriors who die appropriately is poor compensation for an existence that's brutal, short, and ultimately meaningless, except as entertainment for gods who demand constant human sacrifice. So you've somehow survived longer than most Vikings and lived to see the gradual collapse of the social system that shaped your entire existence. If you've made it this far without being killed during a raid, dying of disease in your longhouse, or volunteering for a suicide mission to avoid the shame of peaceful death, you're witnessing the end of a way of life that was ultimately unsustainable by the late medieval period. Viking society was collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions and failures. The military culture that defined Norse identity couldn't adapt to changing political, economic, and technological conditions that made traditional raiding obsolete and counterproductive. Other European societies developed stronger military defenses, more sophisticated political organizations, and economic systems that made them less vulnerable to Viking attacks while becoming more dangerous to Viking communities. The easy targets that supported early Viking prosperity disappeared as potential victims learned to protect themselves effectively. International trade relationships that might have provided peaceful economic opportunities were destroyed by centuries of Viking raiding that created permanent enemies and eliminated trust between Scandinavian communities and their neighbors. The reputation for violence that once made Vikings feared now made them unwelcome in commercial networks that could have offered prosperity without warfare. The religious system that justified constant violence began losing credibility as Christianity spread through Scandinavia, offering alternative values that emphasized peace, cooperation, and individual salvation rather than collective destruction and military glory. Norse mythology couldn't compete with religious ideas that promised hope rather than demanding death. Political centralization in Denmark, Norway, and Sweden created more stable governments that reduced opportunities for independent raiding, while demanding higher levels of organization and cooperation than traditional Viking culture could provide. Kings needed subjects, not warriors. Taxpayers, not raiders. Productive citizens, not violent individualists. The economic foundation of Viking society, systematic robbery, supported by superior military technology, became obsolete as other societies developed better weapons, fortifications, and military organizations. Vikings found themselves outmatched by enemies who had learned from centuries of conflict and adapted more successfully to changing conditions. Technological developments in shipbuilding, navigation, and weapons made Viking advantages disappear while creating new opportunities that required peaceful cooperation rather than military conquest. The skills that made Vikings successful raiders became liabilities in a world that valued different capabilities. Environmental changes, including climate cooling that reduced agricultural productivity and shortened growing seasons, made them marginal. Lands of Scandinavia less capable of supporting large populations while increasing competition for scarce resources. Viking society couldn't adapt to ecological challenges that required cooperation rather than conflict. The slave labor that supported Viking domestic economy became increasingly difficult to acquire as source populations developed better defenses, and alternative labor systems proved more efficient than enslaved workers. The thrall system that enabled Viking military culture couldn't be sustained without constant, successful raiding. Social tensions within Viking communities increased as economic opportunities declined and competition for resources intensified. The rigid hierarchy that once provided stability became a source of conflict when there wasn't enough wealth to maintain aristocratic privileges while supporting warrior populations. Women's roles in Viking society created demographic problems, as high rates of male mortality in warfare left communities with insufficient men to defend territory and maintain family structures. The glorification of death in combat that defined masculine identity became a liability when survival required population growth rather than military glory. The psychological conditioning that made Vikings effective warriors proved maladaptive for peaceful activities that became necessary for community survival. Men trained to solve problems through violence couldn't develop the diplomatic, commercial, and administrative skills needed for successful political organizations. Cultural values that emphasized individual glory, violent competition, and dramatic death became obstacles to the collective cooperation and long-term planning required for sustainable societies. Viking culture produced excellent raiders, but poor citizens for stable communities. The lack of written records, formal education, and institutional knowledge made it difficult for Viking societies to learn from experience, adapt to changing conditions, or develop the complex organizations needed for effective governance and economic development. By the 12th and 13th centuries, the Viking Age was effectively over, not because Scandinavians lost their military capabilities, but because the social system that defined Viking identity had become obsolete and self-destructive. The warrior culture that once made them the terror of Europe had become a liability that prevented successful adaptation to medieval, political, and economic realities. The descendants of Vikings became Danes, Norwegians, and Swedes, peaceful farmers, merchants, subjects of Christian kings who built stable societies by abandoning the violent values and military culture that their ancestors had considered essential to their identity. The legendary Viking achievement that modern people admire lasted only a few centuries and ended in failure because it was built on unsustainable foundations. A society based on systematic violence, economic exploitation, and religious obligation to participate in universal destruction couldn't survive in a world that required cooperation, production, and peaceful competition. Your life as a Viking represents participation in a historical dead end, a social experiment that demonstrated the limits of what human societies can achieve through organized brutality and the ultimate failure of cultures that value death more than life, destruction more than creation, and military glory more than human happiness. The Viking legacy isn't one of sustainable success or admirable achievement, but of spectacular failure that destroyed the communities it was supposed to protect and ultimately proved that societies built on violence are inherently unstable and self-defeating. Long before she was Saint Joan, the Maid of Orleans who defied kings and changed the course of the 100 Years' War, she was simply Jeanne d'Arc, a peasant girl from the village of Domremy who heard voices that would either make her a saint or get her burned alive as a heretic. Born around 1412 in a small farming community on the border between France and the Holy Roman Empire, Joan entered a world torn apart by warfare, political chaos, and social upheaval that had lasted for generations. The 100 Years' War between France and England had devastated the countryside, destroyed traditional social structures, and created a power vacuum that ambitious nobles filled through violence and opportunism. Domremy was caught in the crossfire of this conflict, a village that changed hands between French and Burgundian forces, depending on military fortunes and political alliances that shifted constantly. Joan's childhood was shaped by the constant threat of raids, the displacement of farming families, and the economic disruption that made normal rural life almost impossible. But it was around age 13 that Joan began experiencing something that would define the rest of her short life. Voices that she attributed to saints and angels, specifically Saint Michael, Saint Margaret, and Saint Catherine. These weren't gentle spiritual experiences or comforting religious visions. They were commanding voices that gave her specific instructions about her role in French politics and military affairs. Content continues with detailed narrative about Joan's religious experiences, her journey to the court of Charles VII, her military campaigns, her capture and trial, and her execution, following the same detailed, conversational style as the Viking story in 1912. An antiquarian book dealer named Wilfred Voynich made a discovery in an Italian monastery that would puzzle scholars for the next century and counting. Hidden among a collection of medieval manuscripts was a book unlike anything anyone had ever seen. 240 pages of text written in a completely unknown script, accompanied by bizarre illustrations that seemed to depict plants that didn't exist, astronomical diagrams that made no sense, and naked women bathing in green liquid connected by an intricate system of tubes and pipes. The Voynich Manuscript, as it came to be known, represents one of history's most persistent mysteries. Despite more than a century of analysis by linguists, cryptographers, computer scientists, and amateur codebreakers, no one has been able to determine what language it's written in, what the text says, or even whether it's a genuine medieval document or an elaborate hoax created by someone with far too much time and an extremely twisted sense of humor. Content continues with detailed narrative about the manuscript's discovery, various attempts to decode it, theories about its origin and purpose, and ongoing research efforts before he was the master of Gothic horror, the creator of the modern detective story, and the poet who made depression into an art form. Edgar Allan Poe was a child born into circumstances that seemed specifically designed to create a writer obsessed with death, loss, and psychological torment. Born Edgar Poe in Boston on January 19, 1809, he entered a world that would systematically strip away everyone he loved and teach him that life was essentially a series of losses, punctuated by brief moments of beauty that made the subsequent suffering even more painful. His father, David Poe Jr., was an alcoholic actor who abandoned the family when Edgar was barely walking. His mother, Elizabeth Arnold Poe, was a talented actress who died of tuberculosis when Edgar was only 3 years old. These early losses weren't just personal tragedies, they were formative experiences that shaped Poe's understanding of human existence as fundamentally tragic, love as inevitably temporary, and death as the only reliable constant in a universe designed to disappoint anyone foolish enough to hope for happiness. Content continues with detailed narrative about Poe's troubled childhood, his relationship with his foster family, his struggles with alcoholism and gambling, his literary career, his marriage to his young cousin, and his mysterious death. And so, we conclude tonight's journey through the corridors of tedious history, and we've discovered that the past is never quite as straightforward or romantic as we might prefer to believe. We've endured Viking brutality that would challenge the strongest modern constitution, witnessed a peasant girl transform into a military leader through the power of religious conviction, puzzled over a mysterious manuscript that continues to defy all attempts at understanding, and walked alongside a writer whose personal demons became the foundation for some of literature's greatest achievements. Each story reminds us that history isn't just a collection of dates, battles, and famous names preserved in textbooks and museum displays. It's the accumulated weight of human experience, the daily struggles of people who face challenges we can barely imagine, the triumphs of individuals who refuse to accept the limitations imposed by their circumstances, and the endless capacity of humans to create meaning from suffering, beauty from brutality, and hope from the darkest possible circumstances. We've seen how societies can achieve remarkable military effectiveness through methods that ultimately destroy the human spirit, how individual conviction can overcome seemingly impossible political and social obstacles, and how some human achievements continue to puzzle us centuries after their creation, reminding us that the past still holds secrets we haven't unlocked. Tonight, as you drift off to sleep in your comfortable bed with your individual freedom, your access to education, and your right to pursue personal happiness without fear of violent death, perhaps take a moment to appreciate just how extraordinary your ordinary life really is. You live in a world where strength doesn't require brutality, where religious conviction doesn't require burning heretics, and where mysteries can be studied rather than feared. Sweet dreams, fellow Insomniacs, and remember, you're living in the greatest time in human history to be curious, creative, and human. Rest well, knowing that tomorrow you can wake up and choose your own path rather than having it chosen for you by forces beyond your control. Whether they're violent gods, feudal lords, or the simple accident of being born into circumstances that value death more than life. The past is full of lessons, but the most important one may be this: we've learned to do better. Sleep peacefully.